Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we've got a set of 6 tracks from an act named MaeBeaNot. The first of these, titled Can't Change, and if we switch over to here we've got ourselves a single and then we have ourselves the EP Disjointed and Mangled. This is not the first time I listened through MaeBeaNot's music. I look forward to checking out more. It's always an interesting ride. We're going to listen through it from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Can't Change, let's go. Always psychedelic, you know. I mean, it really is many chapters within a book. I mean, it is such grand dynamic range as well. I assume that was meant to be an explosion of some kind. I mean, it's just deeply unsettling, to be honest. I mean, the effects chain processing is fascinating, for sure. And we'll come back with those kind of chopped vocals. It's kind of like they're heavily a bit crushed. Is that a thing that's been repeated throughout the track? I mean, like, in these sort of post-track sections, I'm giving an overall song analysis, like a mini one of things from like lyrics, vocals, all the way through to studio production, as well as an overall conclusion at the end that'll also include sort of constructive critique and any applicable, should I say, constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But I mean, first of all, what do we think this track is about? Because I'm not sure. I kind of get the feeling that we're going between those chopped, modulated vocals and those sort of more sort of like lo-fi themes, because we're trying to have conversations, but we can't have them. And so we inevitably come up against this kind of reality of feeling stuck between two polar opposites, potentially. It's maybe we're just kind of accepting that the music wins over at the end. The vocals are a lot quieter. I'm just not sure what to make of it. There were no explicitly, very few to no vocals within this, and no discernible words to me. You know, I'm not sure if it's, to be fair, I'm not sure if it's in English or not. But regardless, it's just the way it was presented was not meant to be a dominant focal point on the mic. I think it was more of an ambient texture as opposed to anything else. That's consistent with a lot of MaeBeaNot's music, so I'm not surprised by that. I think it's just a sensible decision to keep a consistency with how you approach songwriting and production if people are used to your existing work. And it just helps for things to be well connected, I suppose, on that front. The track itself at 5 minutes 45 is a through composed piece that does oscillate between a wide variety of different sounds. There are some parts that are repeated through it, such as I think there's a chord note kind of pattern that we do have at the start there, with some sort of colorful parts that does kind of help to tie the piece together. But at the same time, there's just a whole lot of, again, disjointed and almost corrupted reverse takes there that feel largely uncomfortable when you're listening to them. You have these huge sounding pads and bells at the start there, and the music just expands in the stereo field. And I have to give props to MaeBeaNot, because the production is one of the really sort of fascinating things about their work. It's always done with clear intention. You have some, actually, you know, it's an eighth note groove, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, with like cymbals and clicks and stuff like that around the 13th second mark there, with a root note that kind of resonates there. And there seems to be a semblance of a pattern that's occurring, but we divorce ourselves from that pretty quickly. Granted, I mean more as if we separate from that because we grow with other layers, and it just feels almost like we're unsettled with a consistent tempo. And as we go to that 40-second mark there, where it almost sounds like you're going into a massive riser at an EDM concert there, it's just also a vacuous void there that you feel like you're in the middle of. The oscillations, the looping of those sub basses there, those resonances, the risers, the glitchy kind of reverse takes there, it's just very sort of surreal sounding. It's like we're stuck in reverse. And as we have those vocals come in, it's almost like, oh, we're trying to reach through the void, we're trying to communicate, but then you don't get all the words through clearly, and you realize that you're just too far away in the mist to be able to discern it. When the water comes in, the Foley, before that explosion, that's an interesting sort of phenomenon. It kind of makes me kind of wonder if it's about like, you know, maybe the Hawaiian nuclear tests. I know that might seem really out of left field, but that's what comes to mind when I imagine that. Just you can hear the water, nature, the splashing, really well done within the stereo field, but then boom, just it's huge sounding there. I think that maybe is what's occurring there. And as you continue through the piece after that explosion, it's almost like it's the continuity of everything exclusive of that. And you're sort of left wondering, okay, then why did we have the explosion? What are we trying to envisage here? We have these interesting sort of culminations of those vocals returning, and we do go back to that eighth note kind of groove on the kit and pads and such later on there, but it's very much this kind of mysterious, discontented combination of noises and effects with these kind of these vibrato-ish kind of like echo tails there, pitch modulation, a lot of different techniques that are used to kind of mutate what is existing. And we play with certain resonances on the frequency spectrum, whether it's the low, the mids, or the highs in different parts to make the music grow or shift. Sometimes we just have the vocals by themselves and you realize how quiet they are in isolation. There's almost some spacey sort of UFO-ish stuff happening at 5:17, you know, with the synths that are rising up like that. It's ultimately a painting that I think you need multiple listens with to truly understand. And it's ironic that the title of the track is Can't Change, considering how much it does. But ultimately, maybe that is simply the issue is a lack of a coherent sort of like sound. Maybe it's that we struggle to stick with a sort of a tone or a vibe that we want. Maybe the noise is what makes us. Thematically, it's absent of a main sort of theme there. It's just chromaticism incarnate. Studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, it's more about the deliberate affectation of the Foley, like with the explosion and the water sounds, the reverse takes on the sense, the modulation, the chorus, the kind of chopping, the bit crushing of the vocals. It's about how things are stylized and inserted within this piece and the way things are layered. There's a weird sort of smoothness to it that seems a bit dishonest when I consider how experimental it is, but I nonetheless appreciate that we can make it just different enough to be interesting whilst also affronting enough to be challenging, but not in a way that is too uncomfortable. Maybe I'm just more used to music like this at this stage. It might not be for the average listener, but I do appreciate what's being done here. The frequencies are resonant when they need to. Music surrounds you in the stereo field, things flutter left and right, and they pulse and vibrate and writhe. And ultimately, yeah, it's just a really great start to proceedings. No complaints about this one at all. But we move on to the Disjointed and Mangled EP here on Bandcamp. The first track is titled Disarray. Let's do it. And immediately, you got these bells, these chimes. They're just so heavily chamber reverbed that they lose their attack. Because it's kind of weirdly soothing at the same time. Like there's this kind of glow in the low end there that is kind of neat. They've even synthesized that key to be as disparate as it is. And then we're left with the void. It's just a fascinating use of pressure, I mean, disarray, it's interesting because ironically, I feel like disarray sounds a bit more contained than can't change. Disarray, with a lack of vocals, you're left to sort of figure out what you think it means itself. I suppose maybe the keys are, with some of the tritones or some of the diminished patterns that are doing there, resorting to the minor, is more indicating a sense of loss. But then there's just the low end there. The sub-bass resonance is there before they inevitably rise back up towards the end of the piece and just peter out at the end. I particularly liked the use of the chimes and how they went from side to side, but also how, even though they were chromatic and not necessarily subscribing to a specific sort of chord progression or melody, that they were honest about their interpretation within the piece, just so heavily chamber reverb there, just like they were in a void. They surrounded you, and we managed the bass resonances additional to that in a way where it just seemed very lush sounding in a weird way. Granted, there was a bit of sharpness around the 15 mark there, but again, that's just deliberate pushing of certain frequencies by MaeBeaNot to sort of incur an effect. We play around with tone knobs and those parts to sort of like kind of shape your perceived experience with the tracks. A lot of it is simply kind of oscillating between those highs and mids with the lows palpable in the low end. Like, granted, when the keys come in, it's an immediate sort of like page turn there. You're like, oh, what are the keys doing here? And there are some interesting pitch shifts. Maybe they're using the pitch wheel on the keyboard or something like that. Maybe it's synth, but then it just kind of changes notes suddenly and you realize, oh, is this synthetic? What is even real at this point? I thought that the use of delay on those keys was really kind of creative. It was neat to have them kind of flutter or kind of stagnate in the mix. And they kind of danced around a little bit, even when they got a bit slower there and a bit less active, almost like things were going to sleep. And as we kind of sat in the void there with the heavy mid and low end resonance with the keys sort of continuing over that 2-minute mark, you feel like you're being taken care of in a weird way, even though things are sort of chaotic. We have a very minimalist composition here with the chimes, the use of those synthesizers and the low mids and the keys there, but I feel like the track is structured in a way which makes sense to me. I think we get to the point where we maybe outlived the usefulness or the utility of those chimes to incur a new thing. And then the keys let us have a bit more kind of excitement in the mid part until we are inevitably come to the end there and things rise up again. We had a bit of activity in the ether, and then we're kind of set, especially because this is the start of the EP, you're set for more. Thematically, it's kind of a mixture of major and minors with the keys there, but it's otherwise chromatic. We're just exclusively avoiding a specific key signature or something like that, because I don't even think we're necessarily trying to be musical with this one. It's more about trying to create an aesthetic exclusive of that. And a track titled Disarray, it makes sense for things not to be particularly organized, and maybe the keys being the way they are is an attempt to try and bring order despite how difficult that is. From a studio production perspective, I appreciate how things rise up at the end there. I like how we flesh out things around the stereo field. This is an earlier release of MaeBeaNot, something they released a couple of years ago, so they've been doing this music for a while there. I'm unsurprised that they've got this level of polish at this point, despite how kind of adverse it might seem to some people who are less familiar with the style of music that MaeBeaNot makes. Regardless, I think the EQing, the panning, the filtering of things in the frequency spectrum, the way we sort of specifically extend certain sort of parts of it to make things seem louder or quieter, the way that we use those delay and reverb tails, chamber echoes, etc., to kind of make things a bit more kind of stylized is great. And I think it's nice and loud when it needs to be, but there's also dynamic range, and I appreciate as well if you choke a track and make it too sort of close between the quiets and louds, I think it'll ruin this kind of music. It needs to have room to breathe, despite how claustrophobic it can be. But we have Disconnect, track number 3, or 2 off of the EP, should I say. Great chopping. Are they using a DJ deck to do this? distortion there. Fascinating glowy laser sounds. Brutal use of rotary reverb on that. There's a lack of something in the middle to, I think, keep people engaged. Which is interesting. I mean, that was kind of fascinating at the end. It's interesting disconnect, track number 2 off of the EP. At the end, I was kind of zoning out a little bit, not due to a lack of disinterest, but simply because I think I got so used to what was established that it didn't necessarily capture my attention as much after then. It's just simply because I think I'm used to the kind of unusual sounds, and I think maybe if you were less used to it, you'd be more like, oh, what is this? And of course, the tippy tap kind of zip zap thing at the end kind of snapped me out of it a little bit. But nonetheless, I just need to confirm kind of like an appreciation for the fact that I can get used to this kind of music, and that it's done in a way where there's an equilibrium between it being experimental enough, was not being too affronting, you know. There's a balance there. You have so much at the start of the track. You do have vocals here, but they're so kind of filtered and distorted that it's very difficult to understand what they're trying to communicate. There's one part in particular where they get really loud and it's kind of in your face and kind of snaps at you a little bit. And I feel like that's fine simply from a dynamic range perspective. It's something that is unexpected, therefore you take notice of it. Heavy delay tails and use of rotary reverb on the vocals as well. At another point, disconnect, I think it's effectively maybe the TV that they have there in the video is more sort of suggesting you're just kind of losing your ability to really connect with what's being shown in your life. Like life is a TV show or something like that. That's how I kind of interpret that. Like everything is just a heavily kind of like extravagant noise that is just too much, and I kind of wonder whether this is maybe not communicating how they see life themselves. Everything is kind of blurry and juddery, aside from like those kind of percussive hits that you have in certain parts there that have less of they're a harsher kind of sound, they're more direct there. It's like a stutter that we have, which is mirrored by some of the vocal parts, except with, again, the similar FX chains I mentioned before. And of course, it kind of sounds like a train speeding up and slowing down with those hits there. It does that kind of stuff as well, which is kind of exciting in a sort of an interesting way, because you just, why? Why would you do that? You know, we heavily bit crush stuff and make it chopped and mutilated, and you do separate yourself from that as you go through the piece. It's not consistently like that. So at one point there's just the void of, and you're like, okay, we have this now. And we have that guitar part about the 125 mark there, which is maybe another channel that we've flipped to, which is kind of neat. It's cool to sort of explore another instrument that we haven't had so far as I'm aware, within the EP. We don't stay on that too long. We go back to some sort of ceremony synths around the 143-minute mark, and it's just, we stay on that channel, I suppose, that different angle, until it fades out, and we're left with that kind of pulsating, kind of that crescendo that peters off at the end. It's like a weird kind of stuttery synth there that I'm not sure what is meant to represent, but regardless, is still kind of like a jump scare at the end, maybe. But ultimately, yeah, disconnect. I feel like thematically it's more what it's trying to imply with the audiovisual experience, I think the video is probably important for figuring out more context to this, so well done to MaeBeaNot for that. I think because of a lack of vocals anyways, it makes it more justifiable to have a video involved for further hints at what could be possible there. But I think that as we've gone on, we've been more sort of like opaque about what we try to accomplish than what we have before, which is interesting, especially when compared to Can't Change. We're just expanding our palette. Studio production wise, again, great use of fixed chains like rotary reverbs, etc. Phenomenal dynamic range with that part at the end where that kind of stuttery synth went up and down like that. It had room to breathe. There's deliberate manipulation of those things. It's a deliberate decision to make them kind of rise like that, you know, automation of volume. And I think that, again, the bit crushing of the TV with the filtering on that, making it more sort of low-key and harder to discern, I think considering the EP Disjointed and Mangled kind of makes sense when nothing is too clear at this point. But yeah, honestly, really intriguing music. Really intriguing stuff. We have The Thoughts of Suicide, track number 4. I should note that YouTube gave me an age verification warning before I watched this, so I am mildly unsure of what we're going to have here, but let's do it. I was kind of wondering if we're going to stick with that guitar at the start, but, you know, apparently not. Glitching and clattering on the side. It's interesting how that almost seems 3D mixed, like 3D panned. It really does surround you in the headphones. I feel a heaviness on my chest listening to this. It's interesting to me that some of the sweetest sounding parts are within this song, you know? mean, if I'm honest, this one seems like it's going for an eternity. Radio static. I mean, that was horrific. That was the Thoughts of Suicide, track number 3 off of the EP. I just, first of all, you know, if MaeBeaNot's going through this, if they're still going through this, I'm sorry to hear that they're going through this. And I hope that they can find some help. I mean that sincerely. You know, this is clearly not a spoken piece. It's more meant to reflect the different stages and thought processes you have associated with it. The guitar at the start, you know, is maybe your day until you start thinking about it. You got those kind of chirpy kind of tones to it, then you've got the keys kind of replicating some of those sort of triads or extensions there. But most of this piece is just a consistent void, just harsh pads and strings there, but everything simmers there. You have some sweetness occasionally, but it really is just it's just ever present. And there's this constant ticking underneath a lot of this piece there that adds a sense of unfortunate rhythm to it, because it really is just the same, just different layers of it. And yeah, the ticking becomes less constant as other sort of sweeter sounds come in, like some of the bell sounds that we have around like the 45-second mark there, but then they come back up again. It really is trying to implement the thought process, or like a period of trying to sort of sift through your own thoughts on this matter. There is extensive manipulation of some of these waveforms, these synth patterns, but they're so soaked in reverb that they sound ghostly and like it's just barren sounding. And yeah, there's melodies and harmonies there, but they're exclusive to the concept that they're attached to. We haven't got an overarching kind of position of, oh, this is a major or this is a minor. It's just completely chromatic and chaotic and ambient because of that. Again, the Thoughts of Suicide never are particularly organized. Potentially until it's too late. You have some of those guitar and key parts return around the 255 mark, and there are some moments of respite, but ultimately as I was listening through this, I just felt incredibly sad. It's almost like a horror movie soundtrack, and I think that MaeBeaNot would do very well making those. I mean that. Some of the purest sine waves we have, such as with the 50 part, 350 part there, are almost like a salve, but we don't stay on those for too long. We have these kind of clashy metallic sounds and like harsh kind of like things that kind of oscillate around the stereo field. You have things that hit behind the cans there, and it's just, you're surrounded by this mistiness, this heaviness, and you adjust the rate of those ticks there. I can tell they're using synthesizers for those percussive hits as well, because the LFO rate, and they're probably using analog synthesizers for this and using some fun toys for it, but it's just so inherently creative. When we have the radio static at the end there, it really does seem like we've tuned out entirely there. Maybe it's just gone to black. Maybe we've eventually gotten to a point where we're not sort of concentrating on it anymore. Maybe we can't remember what happens beyond that point. And it really does seem like the end of the connection to a certain extent there. The progression, the journey that you have through this one, I can sort of relate to personally. And it's kind of maybe that's why I feel a sense of an affinity to it, but at the same time, I didn't enjoy listening to it, if I'm honest. It's just not pleasant to revisit those things. And I think that makes it an extremely effective track. Extremely effective. The studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering was on point, on tear. You know, the reverbs, the repeaters, the reverse takes, delay tails, echoes, bits of distortion, the static foley, the radio fuzz at the end. The guitars, pianos, etc. were presented well. Everything was set and elicited to design either a mood or a specific kind of like interpretation of something, and it all feels clearly well maintained. I've got no complaints about it, even though it was incredibly uncomfortable, and I respect the musicality of everyone involved within this. Again, I just hope that MaeBeaNot is doing better nowadays, and that they've found some sort of peace outside of, you know, we all got Suffering. Track 4 off of the EP. The animalistic synth sounds do sound like they're suffering. It just sounds like it's crying, you know? Because there are random lengths to that, I think, unless we're messing with the envelopes of those. I mean, I just feel so bad about it, you know, like suffering. This track literally sounds like an animal crying out or a person crying out, like a person suffering through this crisis that they're going through. The irregular lead patterns there, the irregular lengths of things are like moans or groans there. It's just brutal, dude. And as you have these kind of clattery sounds start up, they're bouncing between the sides of the stereo field there, left and right, with the distortion and fuzz on them. It just sounds like a robot has woken up and is about to unfurl. There's a super uncomfortable layer to that boom, that extended kind of chord that you have on those bells or the kind of pads around the 15-second mark there. And the way they rise there is just, it sounds like the start of a horror soundtrack. And as you repeat with the string pads moving through the piece and you get into that kind of heavily modulated, twisted lead pattern, it's horrific, dude. It stutters itself and chokes itself and it cuts in and out, and it's difficult to listen to. Even when it rises up and changes pitch to maybe suit some of the notes that you hear within the pads there, it's still like the tension is palpable. And there are some parts where it kind of screams at you after it's had a moment to catch its breath, and it's just a visceral experience. You do play around with things becoming a bit more sort of low key and low frequency oriented around like the later stages of the track. But yeah, this was a tough one. I think after Thoughts of Suicide, that's such a heavy listen that listening through this, that wall, that kind of drone that you have at the 2-minute 40 mark is just, it's overwhelming at that stage. And even as the moaning, the kind of groaning dies out around the 3-minute 15 mark, you know, the suffering has ended. You've gone through that period of difficulty there. You just left at the end with a calmer point in the track, potentially still feeling unsettled by it. There, we have some extensions, we have some chord progressions there, but we predominantly go towards, if anything, a diminished sort of like facade there outside of the chromaticisms. It's just brutal. It's brutal. We have deliberate, like they've made it so uncomfortable, also from a studio production perspective, like the vocal takes, or whatever that lead synth is, the strings, the bells, the hits, etc., the different ways that things are looped and chopped and mangled. I mean, Disjointed and Mangled is the name of the album, the EP, right? So I don't blame MaeBeaNot for having this affectation to it. It's just, I'm being honest with it. I think at the same time as you can compliment a track for being great to listen to, you should be open about the fact that it is difficult to listen to. A few of these specific tracks, maybe I'm just a little bit emotionally invested at this point, but it's also, from an empathy perspective, it sounds like they're suffering and you just feel terrible. It's nice and loud, bit of pumping there, but like the production is top. Don't get me wrong. Like I like the way it's been created and handled. It's a lot. We've got End, track 5 today. The bell tinkering away in the background is an interesting twist. Where are we going with this? It sounds like we're winding down, but we're at the halfway point. I mean, it's intensely and deliberately creepy. I'm not sure what to make of that one. That was tough. That was a tough one. Yeah, I'm gonna admit, that was a difficult one to listen through. That was End by MaeBeaNot, track number 5 off of the Disjointed Mangled EP. Probably one of the most challenging EPs I've heard in quite a while. Everything starts neatly enough with the synth pads kind of boom, 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 sort of like arpeggiating a nice sort of like triad there, inferring a sense of trying to find peace at this point when you're kind of falling asleep, I assume, as per the video. And it sounds incredibly lush and promising at the start at least, because you have that warmth and glow from those harmonies there, despite a lot of the kind of fuzz that you've got there that could potentially hint at something a bit sort of more sinister occurring. But as you have those noise synth comes in, and as you have the kind of the music box come in and sort of really become distorted and discordant, you know you're in for a rough time at that stage. It just continues. It just fills the stereo field and frequency spectrum, and it's very intense and overpowering, I suppose. And even when we kind of rise up and then these sort of demented sounding kind of like lifts in terms of pitch from these synth layers, you feel like you're in a fever dream at that point. And at that 2:10 mark there, where things are very kind of low key and things feel like they're starting to come to a close. Structurally, I think that's neat. Maybe we're actually going to go to sleep after all. But then, oh, nope, we're not, because we're going to continue. That's only the halfway point of this nightmare. And you've got this kind of stuttery, kind of wispy, wow, kind of synth there, kind of sizzling there, just like kind of beckoning at you to get mucked up with it. And you have this equivalent kind of like jump scare occur about the 3:15 mark, where just this hiss comes out of nowhere and kind of slaps you in the face. And it's extremely kind of grating. And it just really, especially with all of what we presented earlier on with the lower intensity stuff, it just kind of kicks you in the teeth a bit. And it's heavy in a way that I haven't really heard before. And as we continue through that manically kind of distorted, kind of fuzzy music box playing and arpeggiating a little melody that's kind of cute in isolation, but with everything else is rather sinister, you go to the fuzz, you know, the void, the fizzle. And as things kind of die out after that, you're left in a position of not really knowing what the hell just happened. It's very sort of surreal. I think that the fuzz is meant to be the sleeping, like going to sleep and becoming unconscious and losing connection there. I'm not sure. It could also be permanently losing connection there. Maybe the fuzz is in the end just kind of giving up, or just like, I don't know, like it's incredibly dark. This is not material that I think is going to be for everyone. But what I do take from the bells, from the synths, from everything else going on, is that this is someone who's trying to put their suffering into music, into audio format, and I feel I do that in spades. Just the phenomenal use of dynamic range, difference in crowds and louds from like a compositional and a production perspective is to be sort of like, it's to be admired. Like, it's definitely a unique experience. You can tell they do not care about trying to make music like someone else. It's very personal to them. They put their own personal touch with deliberate and manual adjustment of like oscillators and rates and everything like that. And it takes a lot of time to be able to make music like this, but it's heavy and it's not fun. It's just not a nice sounding track to listen to. But I admire the artistry within it. Studio production, recording, mixing and mastering, honestly, and I have to admit, it's pretty well handled with the post. Any resonances are deliberate, filtering, use reverb tails, echoes, distortions, etc. They understand their post processing. They understand how to stylize things. I think the audiovisual experience was very like, it was very intense. I've said intense a lot. I think we need a moment to think about this track more, and then we're going to talk about it in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these tracks from an act named MaeBeaNot, the single Can't Change, as well as the EP Disjointed and Mangled. In this section, I'm going to be providing an overall analysis of these tracks from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique. And then finally, my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think these tracks are about? Honestly, I think these tracks are about MaeBeaNot going through some really heavy mental health stuff, and they're putting it in audio format, and I want to commend them. I hope they can find the help they need, or that they have found the help that they needed. I wish them all the best of luck in that. As someone who's also gone through that kind of stuff, I think it's important to get help when you start thinking of it, especially if you start ideating, or if there's ideation. And I think people who have gone through similar stuff to this will look at what we've put forward together here and understand the pain and suffering that you're going through. It's music which is not vocal oriented. There are vocal takes, but they're not explicitly clear or understandable. We're not trying to be too literal on that front. I think that's sensible. The last thing you want is to over-explain things. Often with MaeBeaNot's music, it's left up to the interpretation of the listener as opposed to how they want to approach it, and I think that's really cool. I think that's sensible. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a pleasant listen. Like, you have a wide variety of instruments in here, different guitars and pianos and bells and drums and sort of alternate percussion hits, and definitely some basses and lots of different synth pads and repeaters and echoes, etc. But ultimately, this album, this EP, as well as, I'm not sure if it's an EP album to be fair, it says digital album, so this digital album as well as Can't Change, they are examples of through composed pieces that are heavily stylized and integrated in a way which is less about objective musicality and more about the atmosphere and environment that has been created and put forward. We are not trying to make music that is how music is meant to be made. We are trying to create art in a way that represents what we're going through and is true to ourselves. So this is not going to be accessible material to everyone. It is going to inevitably be strange to people, and they're going to be discontent with it, and that makes total sense. But I think for people who do appreciate the ambient sort of experimental noise kind of music, they are going to get behind this and understand it and appreciate it. And for people who are also empathetic, they're also going to listen to this and go, I can understand this music relate to the humanity in the situation I feel for this person. I've already spoken about these tracks in the individual sort of like mini conclusions there. I think Can't Change is more about struggling to find a specific balance or equilibrium between who we are, trying to get away from like the how things are sort of cloudy and trying to sort of gain a sense of purpose and identity. Disjointed and Mangled is someone who is just finding immense difficulty in their life and their emotional state, and they're struggling to get by, and they have thoughts that are clearly quite dark, and I'm not sure what the radio static at the end means. It gives me a really bad feeling, but that's our music that we have here. That is what's on display, and it's really important music, and it's some of the most authentic music you can come across. I should note that as opposed to, again, like, we have a mixture of different rhythms, quarters, 8/16s, and triplets, but it's very freeform and organic from a tempo approach there. There are lots of different individual unique ideas there. There are extended chords, and there are some major and minor elements there. There are some notes that are just resonant there. There's music boxes, but and it's talking, but it's not like we're trying to have a coherent chord progression or bass line a lot of the time. We might have some eighth note grooves on the kit with cymbals and sort of clacks and stuff like that. But we also have Foley, to be fair, of explosions and water and stuff like that, the ocean before the explosion. You just left to kind of figure out your own purpose of that, your own sort of understanding of that. And it's just kind of, you can tell they played all their instruments. And in essence for that, it's just admirable how they've not only managed to play all these different instruments as well as sort of code those synths and sort of manipulate and adjust the settings as needed with automation and panning and all that stuff in post, as well as during the actual recording process, but also to know how to go between those parts and to transfer, to emphasize certain parts of the frequency spectrum to make them more or less resonant, and ultimately to really just kind of either lift the listener up or slacken the hell back down. The use of noise effects and sort of synth chains is impressive here as well. I really dig that we were more sort of like comfortable with a wide variety of combination noises, that we had the vocals, but they were a bit less kind of clear in order to make the listener kind of go, oh, why is that there? And effectively, it's just, it's music where, like, trying to explain how it works with the tritonal sort of focus on a lot of it and the chromaticism within the themes and everything like that. It's more about you have to take that journey for yourself as opposed to expect kind of like anyone to tell you what it is. Everyone's going to have their own sort of individual interpersonal experience with these tracks, and that is consistent across MaeBeaNot's music. Thematically, fantastic in the sense that I feel like things typically made sense with the title of the song. Disconnect, for example, I just kind of like it turned off at the end, you know. Disarray sounded confusing and chaotic. The thoughts of suicide were varied, and it was a longer track because often when you're having thoughts about that kind of stuff, it's not a short process. You're sort of struggling with trying to balance and finding grounding and anchoring yourself. Suffering in the end, you know, as you can imagine, things did end in the end. And Can't Change had a wide variety of different attempts at different sounds, going back to the main sort of like identity they had initially. Invariably, it's well produced, but it's not going to be for everyone. I think nonetheless, I appreciate the musicality involved in terms of how avant-garde it is. And from a studio production recording and, you know, mixing mastering perspective, it's, you know, whether it's the vocals, the guitars, the piano, the bass, the drums, the synths, all the different reverse takes, the echoes, different reverbs, chorus, rotary, reverb, all the flanging and distorting and bit crushing, all that kind of stuff. All the different fun ideas, the Foley, etc., they all presented very well within the frequency spectrum and the stereo field. Music's around you and the headphones moved around. So there's some click-clacks on the sides, so there's some 3D panning as well. And if there were resonant frequencies, but if they were deliberate. Nothing ever felt antithetical or confusing from that front. There was immense dynamic range, great use of volume automation on certain parts to bring them up and down. And it was nice and loud, but a pumping occasionally, bass compression limiting was handled. No applicable constructive critique. From a general listener's perspective, if I'm honest, I probably won't want to listen to this music again, not because it's poorly made, but because I feel like it's a once and done kind of thing, where you hear it and you go, wow, that was, I'm going to need a moment to recover from that. I think if you were less connected or maybe less familiar with MaeBeaNot's work and it was the first time you heard it, you'd probably be like, oh, crazy, that's a once-off, right? But you know, it's just, again, I really hope they found the help they need. I think it's more because of from their feeling bad for them, not in a pitying way, but I can relate and I feel sad that they've had to go through it. I think that's mostly why it is that I wouldn't want to listen to it again, because I can also relate to it. You know, these feelings that a lot of what's been discussed today. So yeah, it's personal to me too. And I think effectively the greatest compliment I can provide for a first musician that I review is that I care about their music on an actual personal level as opposed to just a professional one. But well done to MaeBeaNot on this track and album. Thank you for watching my review of these tracks from my next name MaeBeaNot. Hopefully, you know, even if you didn't necessarily have a happy time with it, you still appreciate it. And if you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and their Bandcamp and YouTube pages, and stay cool and stay safe. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I will catch you in the next SPRX. Spiderhands out.